Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today on our webinar. We are starting to do these every other week, and we'll do them on Thursdays at the same time, so noon Eastern. And we're super excited to talk about the future of self-service today. This is a huge topic that we've seen come up again and again in our customers and in the market. And a lot of what we're reading is talking about how do we enable individuals across an organization to interact with data, access data, understand it. So I'm super excited to be talking about this topic today. This is our kind of field notes series. So we're going to be talking about real use cases, real examples. So, Ahmed is joining me and we're going to be having a really great conversation about that. So make sure to tune in for the entire webinar. And before we get started, the conversation, I'm going to talk just about a couple of things. So who we are as LionAI, we are an ed tech company. We're focused on cross-skilling the workforce in analytics and artificial intelligence. We have hands-on application-based education that helps organizations accelerate their strategic initiatives around these topics. We have tons of courses, including a data enablement stewardship course, a data quality course. So if you're interested in learning more, or if you have a team that you're trying to upskill or cross-skill in this area, definitely reach out to us and head over to our website. A couple of announcements before we get started. So we are publishing our ebook on scaling AI with contributions from different leaders in the field. So really excited about that. That should be coming in the next couple of weeks, and that's going to be available on our website. Like I said, you can join us every other week for field notes, webinars, thought leadership discussions, and debates. Yes, actually, we're going to do some fun debates. As everyone knows, there's tons of opinions on how to approach these different topics in our field, and we thought it would be kind of fun to debate some of those live. So stay tuned for our first debate webinar. The next one is that we made it to the semifinals for Code Launch, which is this accelerator program, and we're super excited to participate in that. And finally, definitely sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on our free educational resources. Like I said, we're learning tons and tons as we're working with our customers to help them navigate some of these challenges. So head over to our website, getlionai.com, and sign up at the bottom of the site for our newsletter. And with that, let's go ahead and kick it into our discussion. So I want to introduce myself maybe a little bit, and then Ahmed will do an introduction as well. So I'm Reagan. I'm co-founder and CEO of LionAI. I've been in the analytics space for a number of years. I have an engineering background, traditionally have done pretty much every role you can think of. I've taught data science courses in Python. I've taught web development courses. I've done data engineering. I've been a solutions architect. So I've touched on a lot of these different technical areas of the field, and definitely have a huge passion for helping others learn more about these topics. And Ahmed, you want to do a quick intro?
Absolutely. I'm Ahmed Ilashaki, a senior program manager with LionAI. I've been with the company actually for about 6 months, and it's amazing how much in the 6 months I've seen working with various clients, the topic of data enablement and the various hurdles that different companies across different sectors are challenged with. So I've been in the data space specifically for about 6 months, but prior to that, my background was in the automotive industry, spanning from engineering, development engineering, product management, and program management. So I'm excited today to just share a little bit about what we've learned throughout various engagements with a couple of our clients, and what we learned about data enablement, and hope to get some fun questions from everyone today on what's the future of self-service.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get started, actually, I have a poll that I'm going to launch just to understand who's tuning in, who's listening, and if they're currently struggling with some of these topics that we're going to touch on. So the question is, are you currently struggling with data access, understanding data that exists, or understanding them? I'll give you all just a second to fill that out. Awesome. All right, great. Thank you so much. So it looks like we have some folks on here that are, in fact, curious about some of these topics. So that's great. I want to talk about, and we kind of alluded to that in the question, what is data enablement? What do we mean by that? So as everyone knows, every single role at an organization is starting to touch data in some way, shape, or form. And I'm going to talk about the 4 layers of data enablement later and who's interfacing with what part of that stack. But basically, data enablement is how do we get more people to self-service when they're trying to find, understand, and use insights, data, metric at different layers, all the way from raw data that comes from systems up to a dashboard that is giving you some sort of insight on whether or not something is trending up or trending down, or even outputs from advanced machine learning models that that data science teams are building? How do we take those results and interpret them and use them in a way that's going to help the business in some meaningful way and provide value? So data enablement is literally just that. How do we give access to the right people of the right data? How do we give them context so that they know what that data means, how to use it? And how do we give them enough understanding and the tools and environment and ecosystem able to manipulate data, generate metrics, generate insights, and actually build the intelligence on top of the data that's going to be meaningful for the company. So that's what we mean when we say data enablement. That's what we mean when we say self-service. If you've ever been in a position where you're asking your analytics team to build you a dashboard or a report, something you could do theoretically, but are blocked by either not having access to data or not having the right tools that you need to do that, that's what we mean about self-service. Is a lot of organizations are centralizing the development of these key assets and making it really challenging for folks across the organization who just have questions they need answers to, but have to wait maybe weeks, maybe even months to get those answers. And we want to be able to open it up in a way that's going to not overwhelm people, but also give them what they need immediately. So that's what we mean about data enablement. Ahmed, did I miss anything in terms of what you've seen from our customers' challenges?
I think you're spot on. I think like in a punchline, it's just making sure that right data is available to the right people at the right time. And some companies have different call it maturity level when it comes to like data enablement, data exploration, etc. So some companies we've seen have the central team that does work on providing analytics insights to various other cross-functional teams. Some organizations are set up where they have just one data analyst embedded in each cross-functional team, and then they're just inundated with requests again from various users. I have a quick question on this, I have a quick question on that. Can you send me the data? Or you sent me the data, but I'm missing some context around it. Are you able to, tell me what happened at a specific span in time? And what we're seeing also is, there are some solutions, there are some processes that could be adopted such that you do the self-service analytics on your own first, that you are, folks are enabled to go in and explore and then come back maybe to what we call a data owner or data steward with, call it more meaningful or deeper questions. But to get to that point, to get to that maturity level, we need to have the quote unquote data enabled or data enablement across the organization. Seeing it come from a top-down approach of folks being able to really need to think and tell a story, craft a story with data. Yeah, I think it's people, it's processes, it's technology.
Yeah, I think you're touching on a really interesting thing, which is organizational structures. Like when we think data enablement, there's all these different layers that we have to understand. So the organizational structure and the roles and responsibilities of people, I think, was one of the hardest things when it comes to data enablement. We're so used to going to that analyst or that person that we know has access to the data. There's always like that one person, super smart, knows SQL, knows Python, has access, has navigated the warehouse, understands where things are. They have all of that like tribal knowledge around the data. And it's, bottlenecked, the process is bottlenecked with them. Because if I have a question, I don't know any of that stuff. So I'm going to go to that person every single time I have a question. And that's what we're calling kind of the hub or the centralized, capability of being able to provide insights and do stuff with data. And the idea is, how do we democratize this a little bit more? So that person has to be a domain expert of everything across the whole org. They've got to know the context and use cases of what this data means and that data means. And that becomes a very, very overwhelming role. People get super burnt out because they're getting requests from finance and sales and marketing and product. And it becomes really challenging for you to be able to provide all of the context that people need in order to answer the question appropriately. So how do we get these functions embedded in those different groups inside of those companies? So the different operations inside of that. And I think that's the biggest thing, is like, how do we decentralize this a little bit? How do we get an embedded analyst inside of marketing to be able to get access to the right data they need so that they can answer these questions themselves without having to say, I'm trying to answer this question a little bit differently, or whatever you gave me, that dashboard that's interesting, but it still doesn't answer my question, or maybe I want this field instead of that field. And then it becomes this crazy back and forth trying to like get it right. And you're doing that now with 25 different people, as that centralized group. And it's not sustainable. And it's really what slows an organization down. People just end up giving up and making decisions without having a supporting data to do that appropriately.
Curious on your thoughts of how, if a company, call it, is less mature in that space or in the enablement, going from a 0 to 100, what could that transformation look like? Just depending on, again, their maturity, but assuming they don't have that hub and spoke model and they want to adopt it, what could that look like?
Yeah, so I think I talked about those 4 layers, right, that I mentioned earlier. So a lot of organizations will, they're used to collecting a ton of data, creating this giant warehouse of a bunch of raw data. Now, raw data might be huge, it might be multidimensional, it might be really hard to interpret, or not really usable unless you're super familiar with that data, and you're super familiar with the tools that you would need to process that amount of data. So that's one of the biggest problems, is you can't create decentralization or self-service if you don't create layers that other people can engage with or interact with. So the first thing I always say is, like, let's create some useful views for people to interact with. And that's where people are starting to create these lake houses, or these analytics, like analytic domain or use case domain layers of data, where you've got maybe data sources from different parts of the organization, like product data, operational data, maybe some marketing data for a use case. Those are all some raw sources that you would need to answer questions, but we're aware of what metrics we care about and we've defined them. And so can we create multiple views of that data that's aggregated up to a point where we have a metric we care about? And can you then give that data set, give people access to that data set so that they can say, okay, now I've got data in a way that makes sense to me. I can create a trend chart or a bar chart, no problem, from data that is kind of aggregated up to that level. And so creating that kind of like warehouse, analytics warehouse, where you have all of these derived views that are really useful for people who might not be super technical or might not know SQL or whatever. It's not sustainable to say, learn SQL and figure it out, right? We have to create a layer that they can interact with. And I think what's so interesting is, like, this is a very similar example to computers, right? When personal computers first came out, people found it really hard to interact with it. But then they've created these layers of you interfacing with something easier and easier and easier and easier, where you're like, now I can interface with a computer and I don't have to know what CPU is. I don't have to know what my processor is. I can actually just interface with it with a keyboard and some apps that I'm super familiar with. And it's the same kind of concept for these analytics layers. We don't want to give access to these like deep, raw, unusable data sources to people. We want to build context on top of it that we're people who are technical or are focused more on the business operations can interface with that and answer questions.
I think you touched on a really interesting topic is like the barriers to entry to access this data. And just recently, we've seen this with a couple of our clients where different industries, but have similar challenges or hurdles in that business users come in, they understand that the data is there. They were part of choosing some of the platforms that collect the data and know that they're paying for it. And now they're saying, now that we're collecting this data, I would like to see views. There's, however, the data source, and then there is a final product, what I would like to call data as a product or solution. And they're expecting this clean product that they can utilize to make day-to-day decisions. But that in between, that transformation, right, that's a lot of work. But at the end of the day, for some persona, they're just looking for clean access, clean data, timely. And we've seen like some platforms or tooling like emerge where folks are now trying to adopt it, such as data catalogs, exploratory data analysis, where let's create, as we define some of these metrics, let's make sure everyone is speaking the same language, using similar definitions on different metrics, and aggregate these views and then expose it in a weekly manner that it gets refreshed, or daily manner, depending on the reports. I think of like some marketing managers who, at the end of the month, they're trying to put together a list of their accomplishments or KPIs for the month. They know that the data exists. there is a way to come in one of these tools and say, I would like to have this be automated for me. I've worked with the DNA team to create this view from various data sources, but I would like to enable myself and the rest of my team to go in and check on the status of how we're doing day to day, week to week, month to month, etc. And some of these tools are actually pretty neat in terms of like data cataloging, not just for getting standard definitions across, but also giving previews. So some of the data, so folks can get call it a taste of what's powering a specific view, what's powering a specific metric, so that if folks want to go in a deeper layer of, I understand, this quadrant here, I understand what it's showing me. I do have a little bit more questions. Can I go back and can I do some traceability in terms of like data lineage? Can I see where that's coming from? And some of these tools now, to your point, if we're talking about it from a computer analogy, that was a great analogy, it was really complicated back in the day. Now you have some of these tools, like a advanced data catalog, where it's really easy to see all this. It's just that a click of a button away. And as long as folks are familiar with the UI, and we've seen some of these UIs, they give you the Google-like experience. You go in, you have the searchability of different topics, different metrics, etc., and it pulls it right away. And it's pretty neat. It to your point, democratizes the data and makes it easier to craft a story from what I've seen so far.
Yeah, I think what's so interesting about that too, with this catalog experience, is that there's all of these relationships created. So you mentioned lineage. So now we know there's like a whole use case that maybe this other person in this other business unit created. And there's dashboards and reports that are feeding off of data that you're also interested in. So I can then look at the data. Oh, okay, this is how the data is being used for this use case. Now I have ideas on how I can use it maybe a little bit different. Maybe I want to use some of that data with another data set to answer a different question, but related. And I think that's what's so interesting, is before everybody was just kind of doing it in a silo. I've answered my problem, so I have my solution and I'm done. But providing that solution back out into the entire organization to be searched and understood and looked at creates a lot more ideas. Like, there might be similar questions that sales and marketing have, but they care about different things slightly. So to your point, like, it really opens up the creativity side of how to use data when you can see tangible examples of other people using the same or similar data with different or related use cases. And I think that's what's so interesting about that catalog component is being able to provide that, and the definition piece, which is always so comical to me, going into an organization and asking 6 different people what a specific term means, and it means something different to every single person. And that's what's so interesting. Like, how are you going to talk about metrics and data and insights with each other if you all have a different understanding of what that thing means? And it makes it impossible, because a lot of times we're making these things up, right? Like, we're making up a word that means something to our organization, and it might mean something in the real world and a different thing, but because we're using it, it means something specific to us. And so everyone at that company needs to know what that word means and how to talk about it. And a catalog can provide you with that. Like, okay, well, let's all agree on what that word means. Let's put it in the catalog. And then if it ever needs to change, we'll go back up and change it, and we can let everyone know. So I can go in and search for that now. And I think that's what's so powerful about a tool like that. And it's not necessarily the technology piece of it or which one you go with. It's the concept of speaking the same language, being able to have discussions about things, understanding what's already out there so I don't redo it and do it a little bit different, and then people are confused about which one's right. I think that's one of the biggest pieces of enablement that helps organizations move quicker and provide more value.
Absolutely. You made me kind of like have a couple of flashbacks on examples where it's, maybe a global company, right? We're thinking about maybe a smaller company, folks are trying to use the same terminology. What about a global international company with various offices, and they're all trying to calculate the same thing? The sales team is trying to align on specific KPIs, and we're working with a global customer, a global client, where the global client expects the North America team, the Asia Pacific team, the European team to be speaking the same language, right? It's one company. But unfortunately, sometimes we also see that while there are some assumptions or that metric change slightly region to region, etc., and that tribal knowledge unfortunately hasn't transferred to the other part of the world yet. So I even think about the concept of the data catalog is even more powerful as you're trying to scale your organization. And you could scale your organization even by acquiring a new company, right? Or you integrate with a new company. Think about that acquisition. If we have a strong foundation of what our quote unquote standards are, and we've seen that before where a lot of companies do apply standards, but unfortunately it's not always in an easy to understand manner or easy to even view manner or search, right? There are some tools out there that enable that. And if you start creating the concept of data owners, right? Part of big thing of data enablement, or the theme of data enablement, is the people, right? That's consistent. You need to establish owners, need to establish quote unquote stewards, folks who understand the data, can provide some context to then the analysts who will do the work, whether it's within that group or across various groups as well. But you just made me think about, wow, as you really try to scale, and to your point, move quickly, you need to have that strong foundation to build off of. Otherwise, it's just going to be a very vicious cycle in the future.
Yeah, it'd be a really interesting metric to understand how much rework happens inside of these companies. Like, how many times is the same problem getting solved, but differently across an entire company? That's really interesting. I think the other thing that sparked up to me too was like those people who become so insanely critical that if they are sick, or if they quit, or if they're overwhelmed, or if they get, like, we know people are moving around to different companies now a lot more than they used to. Like, that is detrimental for a company. You're losing all of that knowledge. And so talk about risk. I mean, you've got to get that into a place where it's easily accessible, easily maintainable, easily understandable. And I think that's part of this like democratization component. We should not be reliant on one person to answer our questions or know where the data is, or, oh yeah, we made that decision because of this thing way back in the day, or 10 years ago or 5 years ago. We have to be documenting that, connecting all of those pieces together so people can navigate it pretty easily, especially if teams are expanding, right? If you're growing or scaling your team, you want to onboard them as fast as possible, send them to the catalog, let them do some research. It becomes a really nice way to do that. I think you touched on another topic that I want to make sure we cover as well, which is this whole like operational solution versus research. So like if you're launching a new feature for the product or something like that, and you've got very specific things that you want to look at when the product or that feature launches, that might be a one-time thing. Or maybe we're just trying to evaluate whether or not it is valuable to create this feature. That might be a one-time research initiative. I want to look at these numbers. I need to get some output. I'm going to put it in a deck. I'm going to present it. That is totally reasonable. So in that case, we want to provide that person the access to the data, a way to get the metric they're looking for, and a way to grab those results. But you also touched on this ongoing solution, which are these metrics that we care about month over month, year over year, on an ongoing basis, even models that are producing outputs that are operationalized. So this model is predicting whether or not this customer is going to churn, this person's going to buy the product, right? And we need that on an ongoing basis so we can intervene, or we can understand why that person is no longer wanting to pay for the product, right? Or if they're going to churn. So I think in that particular case, we need to treat these solutions like products. And so we need to provide a way for people to update that on an ongoing basis. I can't tell you how many times I see folks pull data from a system. So you grab a snapshot in time of data and you're like, okay, I need this for my sales report, or I need this for my report out for the month. I'm going to grab all of that data down. Ask the question
quickly, right? Someone came in, asked me a quick question. I need, by end of day today.
Exactly. So I'm going to pull it down out of the system. I'm going to do my pivot table, manipulation, whatever, add these two columns, add that column, create the output. So much room for error, so much manual work. There's just so many things wrong with that whole process. When you pull data out of a system, it's no longer up to date anymore. And so how do we create these ecosystems that's easy for somebody to generate what they're looking for once and just have it there, share the results, get feedback from people, and have it as an ongoing report. So I don't have to keep pulling it. I don't have to make sure. I mean, it's just crazy to me that people are spending their time doing that. And the system needs to be enclosed. We can't keep pulling data out of the system because it's going to, in those circumstances, it's going to add a lot of overhead.
No, absolutely. You know, I think of, you say overhead, I think about, a lot of the management teams think, oh, we have an initiative, strategic initiative to be more data driven, and we want to enable our teams to have access to data, get insights quickly. But unfortunately, we need to staff this, and this is going to cost us a lot, and this is going to take a lot of time to stand up. But what about the time, to your point, that you're losing in the rework process? What about the time or maybe inaccuracy that could lead to fatal decisions? Right? You're making decisions to bid on a new business. You're making operational decisions that could not be based on 100% level of accuracy or consistency month to month. If someone is going in last minute, adding something, creating something. So when we do have that standardization and easy access, we've seen that just really reduces a lot of time. And what you're thinking about in terms of cost to stand this up initially, it will probably pay dividends later on in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see we've got an audience question. So I'm going to take that because we're almost at time. So that 30 minutes flew by really fast. The question is, how have you seen teams quantify the impact of their data enablement and catalog efforts? I think Ahmed, you touched on one, right, which is time. How much are we wasting on rework and manual processing? And I think, so there's always like the waste, impact. So that time to insight, how are we shrinking from the time I have a question to the time I get an answer? And then how much time are our teams spending supporting that effort? So those are two ways from like a waste management perspective of like reducing waste that happens in the process. And I'd also say like what questions are getting answered that you couldn't answer before because you didn't have that data available, or you didn't make like that process wasn't so painful that you actually wanted to answer the question. And so I think that's the kind of, we didn't have anything, now we have something. So looking at how many questions are getting answered and how much value is associated with those answers. I think finally, there's kind of a quality control piece of this too. People think because you're democratizing data access and insights that there's going to be more quality issues. I actually think that there's an argument to be made for being less, there being less quality issues because you're keeping the data in the system. You can monitor things much easier. You can look at, people are going to get access to data one way or another, come hell or high water, right? They're going to ask somebody to export a CSV for them to do something with. Like people are going to get it. So you might as well have it enclosed in a system that you can monitor access, you can monitor what they're doing. You can pre-create these metrics that have already gone through a rigorous quality control that you can then present and make available to them. So you can make it so that you have quality inserted into this entire ecosystem. So I would think really strategically about how to create an enclosed ecosystem that gives access to the right people at the right layer and provides a way for them to be able to get to that insight much faster. So that's how I would quantify value from these initiatives. So thanks for that question. And with that, we are going to wrap up. If you are interested in staying in the know with us, like I said, go to our website, getlionai.com, sign up for our newsletter. You'll also get an email after this recording that is available on our YouTube channel. And if you are interested in any of our courses, please reach out. We are happy to talk about that. So thank you so much. Thanks, Ahmed, for having this conversation with me. And
Absolutely.
everyone, enjoy the rest of your Thursday.